want to catch some candid moments.
Yeah, he probably will.
Yeah.
So. I gotta stop laughing.
No, you don't. If it ain't fun, it ain't work. I'm Teena Post, born and raised and adopted here in Sault Ste. Marie. I've lived here my whole entire life. We've started this business about 5 years ago, individually, for myself, and 10 years ago, probably for Matt with Grum paddles. And this is Grum.
I'm Matt Post. I grew up in Kinoc, Ontario, which is north of Thessalon, north of Iron Bridge, about 15 minutes. I was born Grum from Dr. Seuss book, found of a hippopotamus chewing bubblegum. Been called that since I was a baby. Everyone down the line still calls me that, and a few people in the Sioux. My youngest brother built me a paddle for a Christmas present, it's here, it's in the center. That was probably around 20 years ago. He built me that paddle, and it was the greatest thing I've ever held in my hand, almost. Anyway,
and what made you want to recreate?
So Christmas, getting close to Christmas, a couple months close, and I'm like, okay, what am I gonna do for Teena? And my partner at work told him about the paddle I have from my brother, and he's like, I have this piece of walnut that, it's almost 2 inches thick. It's about 6 feet long. You could make a paddle out of that. And so I took my brother's paddle and I traced it on this board with a marker and cut it out. I didn't even have tools at the time other than hand saws and chisels and files. And I made Teena the first paddle that I've ever made. And once I made it, I realized how cool when I put the first finish on that piece of walnut. Just seeing that pop of the grain and the contrast, and the walnut naturally has lights and darks and streaks. It's a very beautiful wood to work with. And it smells good. And that was the kickstart.
Mm-hmm. At Christmas, I also bought you a book. I bought him a book on how to build paddles.
Yeah.
Because I saw the spark in his eye after he received that gift, and I'm like, what do I buy a guy that has everything, right? Yeah. So I bought him this book on how to make paddles, and he just read it from front to back, and he just ran with it. I was like, man, it's that easy. But that's honestly what happened. That book you still have it here in the shop.
Oh yeah.
And now you have many more.
Build your own canoe paddle.
Mm-hmm.
We like to think we do a bit of everything, or we'll try to make anything we can make. Anywhere from, obviously, canoe paddles. We do glassware, we do clothing line, charcuterie boards, carvings, t-shirts,
wooden signs.
Do furniture. We've done all kinds of furniture. Most of it's in our house, some of it's in other people's houses. But
personalized ornaments, Christmas cards, home decor. If you have an idea, I'll create it. Personally, I've always loved to create. I love getting my hands busy. I love thinking, like someone giving me an example of what they want and then taking it and making it my own. It gives me a satisfying motion for myself.
Okay. Sure.
Yeah, a challenge. I guess that comes down to someone giving me an idea and being able to create it makes me go,
Or I'd like to try that, yeah.
My table saw is so old that you would have to square everything up manually. That was my dad's table saw, and before that it was my grandpa's table saw.
The first step is to build the shaft. I laminate most of my shafts because you can use, it doesn't have to be perfectly straight lumber then. If you laminate it, I can press it so I can force warp wood to be straight. So I've used blistered maple from Thayer Lumber in the blades paddle, a curly maple stripped down the center, and then straight grain maple for strength in the shaft. So the paddle's built to be used and also built to be beautiful. I laminate all my shafts, usually with 3 pieces, sometimes with 5. Particularly in this paddle, it was laminated with 3 pieces, 2 two pieces of straight grain maple with a center strip of curly maple, laminated together with a polyurethane glue. Laminated shaft is guaranteed straight, for one. It also adds a superior strength to a single solid shaft, which could have any grain breakouts or not a knot, but any blemishes in a solid piece of wood slightly weakens it. So I found that using laminations adds massive amounts of strength, especially because I run them perpendicular to the blade. It also adds beauty, a little bit of a signature strip of curly maple. Once the shaft is built, I clean it up and I rough the edges of the shaft and I glue the blade sides on. Blade sides I try to book match them, which does two things. It uses half as much wood because the blade on a paddle is fairly thin. So if I buy a 1-inch piece of wood that's 3 inches wide, I can actually make a paddle blade sides out of that smaller piece of wood. It allows you to select very beautiful pieces of wood at a little bit reduced cost, obviously, and there's less waste. So I build the shaft, I glue the blade sides on. I use polyurethane glues. It's by far the strongest glues that I've ever used. They're impervious to any chemicals. They're ultra strong. I break every joint that I make. I purposely break the end cut off of the paddle, off the rough piece, just to make sure that glue joint is ultra strong. And I've never had one that breaks on the joint. They always break the wood. Knowing that, I use polyurethane glue. The polyurethane glue actually requires water to cure. So prior to that, I actually rough the surface. You don't want to, having a smooth surface glued together, there's less surface area than if the surface was roughed, corrugated per se. So I score with about 40 grit sandpaper the glue joint itself, even if it's only a 1/2 inch thick piece or a 1/4 inch thick piece of wood. Having that scored will double its surface area, and it gives that huge surface for the glue to impregnate into the wood, into the pores of the wood. So the joint isn't just that flat joint. The glue crisscrosses in between all the different pores of the wood. It forms a little bit stronger than if you were just to have it buttered up. I've been told that I use way too much glue, and I think that's better than using not enough. So I'm not really too worried about the bit of waste of the foaming up of the glue. So yes, it makes a huge mess. I use a plastic sheet so the glue doesn't stick to the plastic. You can easily remove the glue from the shaft of the wood. I don't do it with sanding because you don't want to breathe the dust in. I wear masks, but I prefer to not wear any masks and just work cleanly. So I cut the glue off, dispose of it, and then you have a perfect square or rectangular shaft. So once the paddle's glued up, it's time to put a pattern on it, a rough pattern, just to get the basic profile. And I cut out the waste, which would be waste on the bandsaw. And I usually move outside at this point. There's a mess outside, and I'll use a hand planer, an electric hand planer, and I bring the blade down fairly close, probably about 1/8 of an inch out of thickness, so 1/4 inch over thick. No, 1/8 of an inch too thick. Flipping the paddle over, back and forth, eyeballing it both sides to make sure it's straight. I do have a center line drawn on it. This is a reference point, but it's not an absolute reference, because once you start thinning the wood, especially with highly figured wood, it can warp on you, depending on the moisture in the air, as well as just the fact that there's stress in highly figured woods. So I usually keep them a little bit thick and let them hang for a day before I move on to the next step, which is really coarse sanding to bring it down closer to the point where you want to actually start being a little more refined in your process. I'm pretty rough. The way I initially work on the paddles is about removing material, but not removing so much that you're gonna obviously ruin it. Remove as much as possible, hang it up for a couple nights in the shop where it's dry and the fire's going. And in a few days, when you look down the shaft of the paddle and it's either straight or it's slightly warped to one side. If it's slightly warped to one side, it's okay. It's not a big deal because you've left it thick. You want that wood to naturally relax where it wants to be. Once that's happened, obviously the longer the better. Then I'll reshape the paddle to be as straight as it can possibly be. They're not perfect. They're canoe paddles. They're still meant to be used and hopefully push you over a beaver dam, get you through some really nasty weather. Maybe you have to push off a rock here and there or jam them into the ground to keep yourself from falling and dropping something else that might be a little bit more precious on your shoulders if you're carrying a baby. So babbling. That was there's some there's a 10. So once the blade's thinned down and tapered with sanding and spoke shaving, I work on the shaft, bring it down to the same, an oval shape, kind of a rough finish, but feels symmetrical. Work away at the grip, get it close to fitting nicely in your hand, but still a little coarse. And then I work on the throat section to hollow out the edges of the blade at the throat so that the shaft still thins down gracefully into the blade. It adds a little bit of strength and reduced weight in that section. And it's kind of a signature thing we do. It lightens the paddle, but carries strength in it. And it's kind of the most important thing that is in any paddle we build is the way that the shaft continues down a little bit into the top third of the blade. As well as keeps it a little bit light.
So why do you use spoke shape? Is that a common technique?
The spoke shave is, I'd say in the paddle building world, the spoke shave is probably the primary tool to use. There's tons of different ways, but a spoke shave is such an ancient tool used back in the day to make wagon wheel spokes. That's why it's called a spoke shave. It's basically a very short plane. Being short allows you to maneuver it fairly easily. I use it with one hand, not so much. You're supposed to use it with two hands, but I use it with one hand because I hold the paddle handle or the blade, depending on which way the grain runs, to spoke shave. So that tool to me is probably the most important tool that I own. You can build an entire paddle with just that one tool, whether it's from a single board that is a rough cut board, or you bring it to the state that I do, that's a fully shaped paddle, and then you spoke shave it. But without that tool, I wouldn't be able to do it. So definitely the most important piece of equipment I own.
With the whole process, you use a mixture of power tools and also hand tools.
Yeah, I find that power tools obviously speeds up the process. You need that. Hand tools refines it. You need good sharp hand tools, and the right tool for each job. It's to maintain that handcrafted quality. To me, you still need to finally finish the paddle or any piece of woodworking with your hands on it. Whether it's the final sanding, whether it's the shaping that brings it close. Like I say, I use power tools to bring the paddle within 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch of where that finished paddle is, and then I use hand sanding and a spoke shave and various other techniques to bring it closer to that final. Something that feels right in your hand. Having a hand tool in your hand, sandpaper in your hand, you feel the paddle. You feel the grain in the wood. Power tools, you can't feel that. Yes, I use power tools to bring it down, but once it's at that final state, you got to have it in your hand, because the person using it is going to have it in their hand. They're going to feel every blemish in it. But if you've rubbed sandpaper over it 1,000 times, you're going to feel it and remove the blemishes. We originally branded with ink. I would actually use a pen and draw the hippo head from Grum paddles, which we first started out as. We moved the hippo head. I sent it to a brother of mine who has a CNC milling machine. He made me a hippo head brand that we would heat up in the fire or a torch and brand that. And then we became Mum Grum and had a custom built, handcrafted by Mum Grum brand with the bear and the hippo in it, because that same brand goes on all our other woodworking, or backyard science, or charcuterie boards, everything else we make, as well as our clothing line at the time. And then we met Konrad, Naturally Illustrated, and have a new one that we don't have a brand yet for. So Teena makes me a stencil, a vinyl stencil that I hand burn the outline with. We found that if I was to trace it with a pencil, burning it, the burning would swell outside, spread outside of the area. So the vinyl kept the heat focused into the area. So our current technique on some of our more elite paddles, or more finished or refined paddles, is to use the stencil that Teena makes me and hand burn each brand,
Each piece.
into it, and it just feels handcrafted to do it that way. Putting your art on a paddle, on my paddle. I know you've done paddles before, so not only how is it different from other media you work on, but what is it like working on mine? Is there room for improvement on what I do?
Well,
Not only that, but
Well, working on your paddle was so amazing and special. It's very interesting because when I first started doing creating artwork on paddles, one of my very first initial inclinations was I would really like to work with somebody local that makes handcrafted paddles. But working with your paddle, it's by far the most beautiful paddle that I've probably worked on.
I appreciate that.
The quality of the wood was just so amazing, and it was fine-tuned for what I do. Like we selected this type of wood specifically. I know when we worked together, I didn't quite know yet what I was going to paint on it. I know you asked me a couple times.
I loved that you didn't know.
Yeah, I had no
Because
idea. I just,
your approach mimicked mine so much, and that's why it was so difficult to talk about my process.
Yeah.
Because you don't know the process. Every paddle has its own process. Sometimes I do babble right now, but
no, you're exactly right. Everything has its own process, but yeah, I didn't really know exactly what was gonna come out of it. I didn't have a composition in mind at all. I think the night before I went and did the actual painting of it, I had this idea that came into my mind that I needed to put a canoe in the piece.
yeah,
So that idea came through, and that was like a major part of it. So I already had kind of a jumping off point. And when I first got into my studio and before I started doing anything, I did a rough sketch because initially my idea was just to do a smaller inland lake. I was going to kind of draw inspiration from Lake Michigammon, one of my favorite spots to go canoeing in our area, because it's just so beautiful, and I have a lot of reference photos from it. But I did that in the initial rough sketch that I did on paper. But as soon as I got onto the paddle, I don't know what it was, but initially I started drawing out the mountains, and immediately I was like, nope, this is going to be a Lake Superior theme. And so I left the horizon going out, and I think it worked perfectly because that's where where the shaft comes in, and it's a little curve.
we noticed a couple things you followed.
Yeah.
In the wood.
And so it made sense. And especially like on the flip side, we have your new logo, which has the outline of Lake Superior. I was like, for the first paddle, I think a Lake Superior piece is necessary. Like it just worked out, and it worked out naturally.
You just had to feel right.
It flowed into it. Yeah,
naturally
exactly.
illustrated, right?
Exactly. So it was just perfect. It felt perfect, and it was amazing to see that come together. And yeah, I loved that part of it. And I was so pumped while I was drawing it. I was like, once I finished
That's how I felt when I was building it.
The pencil sketch, I was like, yes, this is the design. I'm really happy with it, and everything else just kind of flowed together.
I absolutely love that you curled the image around the edge of the blade.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you hadn't done that, it would not be the same.
Yeah.
I don't know how it's an extra little kick that you could have ended it at the image. It's going to hang on a wall or be used, but having that edge with your artwork in the same detail, on a 1/8 inch thick section.
Yeah, it was a little.
I could imagine there's nothing to rest your hand on. How you would have held this to do what you do, and the fineness of the stippling on there.
Yeah, I love going over the edge. I think going over the edges gives it a lot of character.
Depth.
Thickness. It's a little thing, like you said. It's not going to be noticed right off the bat.
It was the first thing I noticed. The very first thing I noticed.
In general, if it's hanging on the wall, the way it was revealed to you, obviously you're seeing it kind of from the bottom up. But it's
because for me it was the wood continues on the top section of the blade, obviously. To have the image continue on the bottom section, just seemed to pull it all together.
I think it would just feel weird if it were just cut off without anything. Ultimately, the only other thing that I think that I might have done if I didn't move the image under was to just do a black line, but I think that would probably get lost, because then it would have to end somewhere, and there's just no natural end point. Whereas this
gave it one.
This naturally ends it perfectly. So.
Oh, beautiful job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. How do you feel about having your paddles turned into art?
I honestly think it's amazing to bring two beautiful artists together and collaborating one masterpiece. And I don't know, I love what he does and I love what you do, and I just think it was pretty spectacular, personally.
I think Mum Grum, us, are we were built on local artists. We're built in collaboration with other people. Whether it's our wood suppliers or local artists, just being able to collaborate is the coolest thing ever. You know, having your artwork on our stuff is not something we pictured ourselves to be at that state
At this point, yeah.
You know,
it's
we
a quite nice surprise.
Yeah, we got pretty serious about 3 years ago doing what we're doing. We've always done this stuff, but we got serious 3 years ago. And our business motto just 3 years ago was, we're not going to turn down anything that is going to help us as well. So obviously there's a benefit to us having your art on our stuff too. It's whether it's sentimental or financial, it doesn't matter. Like the sentimental part of it trumps the financial. Yeah.
Do you have any future plans? What does the outlook or your comment from look like?
I don't know what our ultimate goals are going to be. I mean, as long as the passion is there in both of us to continue what we're doing, continue getting better. You know, if what we make can eventually not compete, but be staged alongside the people we look up to, that would be pretty cool. See it. It's not all about fame and fortune. It's about this is like, we like doing what we're doing, and I think Mum Grum, as long as we can continue just doing what we're doing and get better at it,
Build our community a little more, expose ourselves.
less waste.
Less waste,
Less.
for sure.
Like sawdust is a nemesis, you know, in vinyls, like everything you cut off of something is waste. So we try to reuse as much as possible.
No, you're not.
It's making sense. Our chaos is making sense. It's all good.
The efficiency. It's all about efficiency for us.
And building more of a community with people that enjoy what we are creating and what we do. And exposure has been a little bit of our lacking, because I'll be honest with you, myself, who does most of the marketing, not all of it, but most of it, I struggle with it. So I need to learn more and not be so shy and put ourselves out there more. And the more we do, the more confident we become. So we need to just keep being us and let the world know that we're here, and it'll grow on its own.
Beautiful. So it's almost like you
Half
can
Bay.
imagine a bay. Or
Half
bridge
Bay.
there. Yeah.
First thing that went to my mind was Half Bay,
Yeah.
and my uncle's camping like right there.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh,
I didn't even plan that. It's
Yeah.
just like, that's just kind of how it flowed out.
That's what it feels like to me. The first thing I looked at, I was like, that reminds me of my uncle's.
Here, I won't leave you behind, won't leave you behind, dear. Every day is a brand new day.